Hello again, YouTube. My name is Bree, and in today's video, I am doing an unboxing of this package of Schmincke Gouache. So, this gouache was purchased for me by my mom during Jackson's Boxing Day sale. They had a big Schmincke sale, and my mom caught me browsing the selection and insisted that I pick out some paint and buy some, or she would buy some, and it was just very touching. I'm very excited about this, and it's extra special. So, as you could tell, the box is quite wet. I went on a walk to the mailbox. When it arrived, I was very excited, and then I got to the mailbox and it started to pour. So, I still wanted to unbox it right then and there, so please excuse that soggy package. For the gouache, I did not want to buy too much or pick out too much, partly because my mom was paying for it and partly because I'm really trying to work more on those limited palettes. So it's going to be, once I finally get it open, a split primary with white. So I go through all the colors here. They'll pop up on screen. But just a little background in my experience with gouache. I started using gouache really sometime 2 years ago, I think, and I've not really committed to it. I've used gouache off and on again. I bought the little 5ml tubes from Holbein, and I would use them from time to time, but I never really took the time to get past that learning curve. And then having taken some of Justin Donaldson's classes back in 2020 and then revisiting some in 2021, I started to use gouache more and more, but those were geared a little bit more towards landscapes, especially the landscape painting one. Imagine that. So I have developed some degree of, I don't want to say confidence, but I've gotten more comfortable with gouache, but more in the area of landscapes. And I really wanted to start working on characters like I tend to do elsewhere and really start to practice there because I like drawing characters. I like drawing people. I don't dislike painting environments. I do want to get better at it. I want to keep pushing there, but I really want to bring everything together at some point. And yeah, and honestly, I should probably practice landscapes and watercolor as well because that's an area where I'm not comfortable. So we'll see. But I did want to share the swatching because I know I like watching swatching of new colors. So for each swatch, I dab a bit on the paper and then I write down the name of the paint and the pigment itself, the light fastness, and the opacity. I didn't really do an opacity test here. I think I'm going to go back and do that later with the dark line and then painting over it. These aren't the best swatches, but it's just something to get me started and to have for reference. I kind of went with some of my usual picks. I use Schmincke watercolors, so I'm not unfamiliar with their paints. Oh, and don't worry about this one. I probably should have edited this out a little bit more, but I got some of my half pans and there were 2 paints that squirted out way more paint than I wanted, and I just saved that and then put it into a stay wet palette later and used it in the painting itself, so no paint went to waste there. I've already completely lost what I was talking about before that happened. So yeah, my general selection, titanium white is kind of a must for any opaque media, or well, I mean, I guess there are other whites too, but typically gouache is going to be like the most pigmented version of the color, unless of course it's premixed with white and is a pastel tone. And basically that means you get a highly saturated color, but for most of your painting, you're going to have to mute it. Whether you're adding white or black or a combination thereof, most things in life aren't going to be at their fullest saturation, so that's why there's a big old tube of white paint. So yeah, some of my usual colors then. Lemon yellow is kind of my go-to yellow on the cool side. Normally I go for yellow ochre, but they don't have a yellow ochre. They have titanium gold ochre. So instead of PY, I want to say it's 42 or 43, or sometimes one or the other. It's PBR 24. It's a very similar color, and it really did work for me, so that's fine. Scarlet PR 254 is a very common red for me for my warm reds, and then on the cool red side, PR 83 is my alizarin crimson. I actually usually have carmine for Schmincke, and I really do love that color, but it's sold out, so obviously the heart had to buy alizarin crimson, even though it's notably not light fast. It's also gouache, so same rules apply. Then for blue, PB60 has been my go-to Indian Throne or Delft blue on the Schmincke line. And then Helio Turquoise is just a gorgeous color, PB16. I think I have it in watercolor. With portraits, I don't tend to use a lot of cooler blues, so I didn't really know what I wanted there, and I had been wanting to start building palettes with a turquoise in there, so this was a good opportunity to try that out. So now that we're in the video itself, I definitely want to apologize for it being so overexposed. I'm not really sure what happened here. I think it might be a setting with my light that maybe I had moved it or adjusted it and didn't remember doing so, and it did not play well with my camera at all. So I made the most of the edits I can do to make it not completely washed out, and I think once I get going, it's going to be less and less noticeable. I had to completely remove the part of the video where I set up my palette because the light was reflecting off the wet palette so much that it was completely blinding no matter what I did. But basically, I put one dab of each color in there on the left side, and then on the right side, I have 2 blobs of white. I really like to have one clean blob and one blob for mixing. I'm a professional with my talk of blobs and colors. I really should. I already said that gouache is not something I'm overly comfortable with, especially when it comes to painting people, and even landscapes. It's something I'm getting more comfortable at, but it's not comfort zone. So don't take anything I'm doing as the way you should be doing gouache, because I'm not that experienced. I just want to share like my first impressions and a painting with you. Honestly, the end result I'm not even super happy with, but it shows part of a journey. So I go from not really using gouache for people much. There's a few, like I had one painting last year, 2 years ago for Gouachetober. That was a person in gouache, and otherwise I haven't painted people in gouache really since, so I have a learning curve I still have to go through, and this is part of that. That was a really long tangent, and now, oh right, palette. So yeah, I definitely didn't really plan out what I was doing. I clearly had a sketch of this little dude in a terrible fighting stance. Don't worry, I know it's a bad fighting stance. That's what I was going for. So I actually did study Taekwondo for many years, so I know better than to have a pose like this. But I didn't really think through the colors. I wanted to try doing a wash of basically kind of a it wasn't just pure titanium gold ochre. I mixed it with white and a little blue to neutralize it, so just to have not a white surface to be painting on and build from there. But otherwise, skin colors, I generally know what I like in watercolor, but in gouache it's still trial and error. So in watercolor I'll use a lot more vibrant colors, and then I'll layer them, and the white of the paper comes through and it kind of tones things down. So while I might put down a very vibrant purple, once I layer it on top of yellow, which is on top of the white, it becomes very neutral. And with gouache, you can't really do that because, I mean, you can work with it more transparently, but I knew I wanted to hit closer to opacity. I didn't necessarily endeavor to go fully opaque. I was just kind of winging it. But it means I have to do more of the mixing on the palette than I'm used to. So yeah, watercolor, I do some mixing on the palette and then a lot of layering or glazing. And then in gouache, it's different because I have to do that mixing on the palette itself. If you're familiar with gouache, first of all, I should have mentioned this way earlier, but gouache is basically opaque watercolor. There we go. I'm not at all organized today, but yeah, it also has quite the dry shift. So while watercolor might dry a little lighter than you put it down, that's just because you're no longer having light travel through that water. You're going and seeing directly through the paint to the paper, and it's reflecting back that white of the paper in a lighter tone. That's a terrible explanation. But with gouache, you lose that because of the opacity of the paint. So it's just a different way of working than I'm used to, because my experience with painting really is watercolor. So in past attempts with gouache, I've tried to paint in a way that's familiar to me, which involves doing more of that mixing on the paper, and it just doesn't work well. So basically the way I worked is I built kind of a gradient as I went on the palette. And this is something I learned from Justin Donaldson during his gouache class, is that if you have all of your colors on the palette, this is really obvious, but I don't tend to mix enough paint, so I don't see this. You can use that for reference. So if you know you put down a kind of orangey color and you still have some of it on the palette, even if you need to mix more, you could use what's there as reference. Especially with a Stay Wet palette, your paint stays wet, so you have that point of reference, and then you could kind of mix the same color. So then when you put it down on paper and it dries and it goes through that drying shift and becomes either lighter or darker depending on where it is in that spectrum, you know it mostly should match. That's part of why I use the Stay Wet palette for this. I don't always use it, but I knew I was going to need those points of reference for those colors, because once again, I'm just not familiar enough to be able to judge that I need another I need to fill this section in here and it needs to be roughly this color. I will not hit that same color. I'm just not there yet, and I do make that mistake repeatedly from not having enough paint left on the palette to either pull from or use as reference. It kind of soaks in a little bit in the Stay Wet palette and give it, but yeah, it's not perfect if you don't mix enough paint. So this really is a lot of just experimenting. I'm picking up a lot of background noise. I hope that's not too obvious in the final audio. But yeah, it's really just a lot of experimenting and finagling and playing around, because like I said, I'm learning. I don't fully know what I'm doing here, and I honestly at times felt this piece was very meditative, just putting down paint and layering and seeing the different colors that come through and then adjusting them. And at other times it was extremely frustrating because I was not getting what I wanted. I oftentimes have too high of expectations for myself. And with watercolor, I've developed a certain degree of, in this case, I will say confidence, where even if things aren't exactly what I want, I generally know what's going to happen when I put down paint. I mean, you always have the opportunity to make plenty of mistakes, but I know that if I need to bring a little bit more warmth to the skin, I could just glaze it with some vermilion or scarlet or something warmer to add that warmth. If I've made everything too cool, if I need to add more shadows, I know what to pull and how to mix the colors to layer them in a way that I get the results generally that I want. Once again, it's not a perfect system. I'm not a perfect artist. I have a long way to go and a lot of room to grow, but I just have over time developed some comfort and knowledge, and I'm able to do things that I can't do yet in gouache just because it's too new to me. But overall, I have a lot of problems with this piece because I see a lot of my mistakes. Some of them I knew I couldn't correct because it's the underlying structure. Some are things I just didn't have time to correct because it was getting late and I needed to move on. I had a lot to do. This was a very busy weekend and I didn't give myself enough time. Not completely my fault, well, it is 100% my fault, but I had this brilliant idea about cloning my drives and basically made my computer unusable and had to reformat and reset up my computer. So I lost a good chunk of Saturday doing that when I wanted to be painting. The mistakes we make, or the ones I make, it's okay. So, wow. Completely lost my train of thought and just had a cat run by. She's got the zoomies, so if you hear her in the background, she's just frisky. She's currently crying in the bathroom. My God. So, yeah, basically for a piece that is meant to be a sketchbook piece to experiment, to test the media, to test new supplies, I'm satisfied with this piece. It did what I wanted it to do. I love these paints from this. Hey, bud. From this short amount of time I spent painting this, I really love the feel of the paints. I love how they work. They performed really well for me. Some gouache that I've used, like Etchr, I personally don't like as much because if I put it down too thick, and I do have a tendency to over layer just because, yeah, I make a lot of mistakes and I overwork things. With Etchr, because of the honey, you can get a shiny look to the paint, and I don't like that. Holbein can often look chalky. This I didn't actually. Some areas I layered a lot of opaque paint. Some areas you still have a certain degree of the transparency from the earlier layers. So there's kind of a variety of, why can't I think of the word? Opacities here. We'll just go with that. But where I did layer it over and over again and get really thick, I didn't notice any of that shine or anything that looked overly chalky, so I was super happy with that. The paints are so smooth and so silky. I absolutely loved working with them. They do have the standard issues people find with gouache where there is that color shift because it is gouache. So that's something I've already developed at least some, like I've described earlier, some ways to work around it so it wasn't overly problematic for me because I'm used to that. Otherwise, yeah, I'm really excited to do more with these paints. I could potentially see adding a black or burnt umber or both later just to help further desaturate or easily make some of those darker values, but right now I'm perfectly content with the colors I picked. I do want to try my hand at a landscape, maybe next to this one, just to see the opposite side of the color wheel that I didn't really hit here, notably those greens, and also work more on getting some deeper browns and see how that goes. But I think I should be able to do that just fine, but especially with that lemon yellow and the helio turquoise, I should be able to get some incredible greens. And I mean, if I could get skin colors, I can get browns. So I definitely need to do a landscape as well, but I'll save that for another day. Otherwise, just once again, I do apologize for the quality of this video. Since I was able to make it at least watchable, I decided to proceed with it. But I really need to get my setup corrected so that doesn't happen again. I was pretty tired from fussing with the computer, so I didn't do enough analysis on the video because you can't see everything from that little tiny screen on the camera. It does some adjustments itself. But yeah, that's all on me, so I'll do better next time. Otherwise, I don't really have much to say about the character. I wanted to draw kind of a twisted form just to play with musculature. I can't talk. It's really late. I'm really tired. And just some more forms and to keep it simple and just focus on skin tones. That way I didn't have to deal with too many different mixtures and I could just zero in on that one thing. So I don't know. I don't feel like this was a successful painting. I never really did much with the background. I'm not really happy with the overall form. But like I said, for testing out the materials and getting a feel for them and just making some progress with skin tones in gouache, I can't complain too much. So it was a successful sketchbook session. What am I even talking about? I'm so out of it at this point. I apologize. So, wow, this video was longer than I realized. I'm almost done. Okay. So yeah, in the future, I do hope to be doing more gouache. I feel that I'll make progress fairly rapidly if I keep going. So just got to keep pushing and keep trying, because you don't make progress when you leave your paint on your desk untouched for 6 months at a time. And yeah, like I said, he has terrible stance, a terrible fighting stance. So obviously he had to get a little beaten up, because that's appropriate. And that bruise is dedicated to the massive bruise I had on, that's a different cat. A massive bruise I had on my shoulder after my rollerblading fall a couple weeks ago that is still healing. So just a little memory of the times there. But yeah, that's more than enough for this video, and way more than I should have talked about. So thank you all for being here. I hope you're all doing well and taking care of yourselves, and I hope to see you all in a future video. Bye now.